Hey, this is Tom from MVP Chess. Welcome back to my series on Bobby Fischer's seminal work, My 60 Memorable Games. In this video, we'll be analyzing game number 18 that Fischer played versus Boris Spassky in the Mar del Plata tournament in 1960. You're not going to want to miss this romantic King's Gambit. Before we jump into the analysis, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and join Team MVP. Thanks so much for your support. So after e4, Fischer does not play the Sicilian. At this time, Spassky was still employing the King's Gambit against the King's pawn opening. Fischer did not hold this opening in high esteem, and he was really, I think, playing e5 to try to provoke Spassky into playing this move, which Spassky did. He accepted the challenge. And Fischer grabbed here on f4, so we have a King's Gambit accepted. Personally, I think this gives white too much fun. I really like to play in my own games, pawn to d5. I'll let you investigate that on your own, but I think that's a really nice way to combat the King's Gambit. But here we have e takes f4. Certainly the most principled approach, right? The only way, as I say, to refute a gambit is to accept it. So Fischer always played in the most principled manner, so no surprise that he took here. Knight f3, g5. Okay, supporting the pawn and looking to push on with g4. After h4, we have g4, knight e5, knight f6. Defending the pawn here, and d4. And this is the main idea of the King's Gambit from white's perspective. Okay, you give up the pawn, but since black captured e takes f4, this allows white to grab the whole center. Okay, so very romantic opening. You can see why Paul Morphy really liked to play the King's Gambit, because it does offer white really rapid development and great control over the center. So we have d6. The knight drops back to d3. Fischer grabs on e4. We have bishop takes f4 and bishop g7. So the dark squared bishop in the King's Gambit, from black's perspective, usually comes to this fianchettoed position, where it can be a very active piece. Now here, Spassky played knight c3. Fischer considered this a mistake. He thought much better was c3, queen e7, queen e2, and bishop f5, where white has some compensation for the pawn. After knight c3, Fischer argues that white just has insufficient compensation here for the sacrifice pawn. So Fischer grabs here and then plays pawn to c5, immediately putting pressure on Spassky's center. Notice how the bishop and the pawn are nicely coordinating, attacking d4, and Fischer can follow up perhaps by playing knight c6. Bishop e2, and after a capture, white castles, and as I mentioned, Fischer develops the knight to c6. This is correct. Like, you really can't get too greedy in King's pawn openings. Development is so important. Let's just look. If Fischer instead tried to play h5 to hold on to this pawn in g4, after bishop g5, Spassky can provoke a critical weakening of Fischer's king side, can even drop the bishop all the way back and follow up with knight f4, and Fischer's up 2 pawns here, but he's overextended on the king side, has a lot of weaknesses around his king, and may well lose back one of the pawns in short order. So that's why Fischer, in this position, really prioritized the development with knight c6. But of course, that allows Spassky to capture on g4. Fischer castles. We have an exchange here, and then queen g4. Okay, so Fischer in this position played pawn to f5, and this does allow him to win a second pawn, at least temporarily, but he thought in retrospect that this weakened the king side a little bit too much. So he thought the simple king h8 in this position, okay, stepping out of any bishop h6 ideas, would have been most prudent. After f5, queen g3, d takes c3, and rook ae1, Fischer now takes the opportunity to play king h8. So Fischer is up 2 pawns right now, but his king is feeling a little bit drafty. And white definitely has some activity. So Fischer thought in this position that best for white would be to capture on d6. And after rook f6, bishop b5. And in exchange here, he thought white still had pretty good play. Instead, Spassky played king h1. Okay, and this allowed Fischer to bring the rook to the g file. Now he's menacing some potential discoveries against the queen. Bishop d6. And now Fischer plays bishop f8. Nice move. Discovered attack on the queen. And this is going to win Fischer the dark square bishop, as we see here. So, nice little tactic there by Fischer, positional tactic to win Spassky's dark square bishop, which is pretty important considering that Fischer does have a pretty weak king, especially along the a1, h8 diagonal. So Fischer blocks the check with rook g7, menacing queen takes h4, which we got in this position. So I'm going to turn it over to you. So what's going on in this position? Fischer's up a pawn, okay, but Spassky does have a bit of an initiative. So pause your videos here and think about what Fischer should play to try to consolidate his advantage. All right. In the game, Fischer played queen g4, okay, which he heavily criticized in his post-mortem analysis. He just felt like this move was too uncompromising and just didn't sense the danger in Black's position. Instead, Black should play queen g3 in this position. Congratulations if you found that move. And it's a logical one, right? You're up a pawn. Your opponent has some initiative. You have arguably the less safe king. So it does make sense to offer the exchange of queens, which Spassky really can't avoid. So we would have a position like this where Spassky certainly has drawing chances, but he's got a tough ending to hold down a pawn, especially with a bishop versus a knight and active pieces in Black's position. So that definitely would have been Fischer's best continuation. Instead, he played queen g4, and after rook f2, defending the pawn on g2, bishop e7, menacing bishop h4, skewering the rooks, rook e4. In this position, Fischer should have taken a perpetual. Okay, and that's hard to do psychologically because you're up a pawn. It looks like you have the more active position. Your pieces are really well coordinated. But Fischer did have a perpetual here via queen d1. Okay, and he could just alternate between this check on the first rank and coming back to g4. If the king ever stepped to h2, Fischer has this nice rook lift. Okay, menacing rook h6. So Spassky would have to give a check, and we would have a draw by perpetual check, according to Fischer's analysis. But instead, Fischer played queen g5, okay? Trying to keep tension in the position. And Spassky played in this position queen d4, a really nice centralizing move by the queen. Okay, the queen stands really well in the square, and it really paralyzes Black. And it was in this position that Fischer blundered. Okay, I can totally see why Fischer played this move. You know, it just looks like Black kind of has everything under control. You've got this extra pawn. You've got really nice pressure against the white king. It's easy not to sense the danger. But after rook f8, believe it or not, Fischer is completely lost in this position. So I'll turn it over to you. White to play. What move did Spassky play to completely turn the tables and defeat the American future world champion? So congratulations if you realize in this position that the queen's really overloaded. Okay. The only defender of this bishop on e7 is the queen. And high value pieces like the king, like the queen, are often not very good defenders. So Spassky played rook e5 in this position. Boom! Congratulations if you found this move. Ooh, what a tough blow to Fischer. I'm sure he was just boiling inside after Spassky put this move on the board. Fischer tries to get creative. Rook d8, trying to deflect the queen, but Spassky calmly plays queen e4. And after queen h4, offering this last-ditch chance to try to hope Spassky would blunder here and exchange the queens. Of course he didn't. He played rook f4. And now, as you see, the queen cannot maintain defense of this bishop on e7. And in this position, Fischer resigned. Ouch! What a tough loss. This loss really upset Fischer. And it actually made him look for a refutation of the King's Gambit after the game. I think he was so furious that he lost to such a dubious opening, at least one that he considered really dubious, that he just had to look for a refutation. And he published his analysis in a periodical called the American Chess Quarterly back in 1960, A Bust to the King's Gambit. And Fischer, in that article, instead of 3g5, recommended pawn to d6, which became known as Fischer's defense, and actually is, to Fischer's credit, at least I'm looking at it now, the engine's top choice. But is it a bust to the King's Gambit? No. Because White still has so many practical chances, so many practical attacking chances. That's why, again, if you're an e4, e5 player like myself, and you're looking for a good response to the King's Gambit, I really recommend d5 and not give White all the active, romantic attacking chances that he's searching for. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe, smash that subscribe button, join Team MVP, and turn on your notifications. You're not going to want to miss my next installment of the series, which is game number 19. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.